SAP Security is a very wide field and has many different aspects to it. So today we will take a look at all the security considerations, how to tackle security threats, what are the SAP offerings in this space, and then finally we will create a brand new user, and give it restricted authorizations and learn about how authorizations and role work in an ABAP environment of SAP. So there's a whole spectrum of different security threats to an IT system, starting with the social engineering. So a typical example is passwords being shared between colleagues and friends. And then you have network related threats, sniffing, eavesdropping, or tampering. And then finally, the server related threats. These can come in different forms and shapes. So, for example, code injection could involve cross-site scripting attacks, and you could have the SQL injection as part of the code injection attack, and so on. But all is not lost. There are measures that you can undertake for each of these threats. So the figure here gives you some examples of how you can use security measures against various potential threats. So setting up a firewall, OS hardening, virus detection, patches, etc. An important aspect of technical security is to regularly install security patches for applications and operating systems that are provided by the vendors. Even though many security lapses can be fixed, customers and users still need to update their systems regularly. To counter this wide spectrum of security threats, SAP has a wide spectrum of offerings. So, starting from identity and access management to code vulnerabilities, threat management, and different platform security functions. And this list is by no means conclusive. There are many other offerings that are springing up almost every other day. So things like mobile secure is a very recent offering. And then you have specific security offerings for BW reporting, for HANA, etc. For the rest of this session, we will mainly focus on the SAP application security that involves role management, user authorization, and access control. From an application security perspective, it is important to focus on the user and the kind of roles and authorizations that are given to a user. So this figure shows a typical system landscape with ABAP, Java, and non-SAP external systems. In this type of a landscape with SAP and non-SAP systems, it is useful to use a directory service like LDAP, for example, as the primary storage location for user data. Also, as shown, the ABAP systems are maintained with CUA, which is Central User Administration. CUA synchronizes user data with the directory service. In case of Java systems, the directory service is configured as the data source. Non-SAP systems also have access to users through the same directory service. SAP systems are secured at various different layers. Each layer has its own protection mechanism. To avoid unauthorized system access, system and data access control mechanisms are provided at the application level. While protecting an SAP system, you need to keep the following 2 points in mind. The first one is that you need to implement the security at all these levels, because the overall security hinges on the weakest part. And the second point is that you need to understand that a complex authorization concept at the application level is only a single aspect of an overall security policy. People perform various roles that belong to business scenarios. So in this figure, Karen performs the create purchase requisition role in the procurement business scenario. John is assigned to the role of service representative, create purchase requisition, and release purchase requisition. This means that a person can have multiple roles. A role is a group of activities performed in a business scenario. For example, the create purchase requisition activity belongs to the create purchase requisition role. A role includes all the activities that can occur in a given scenario. So here is how roles and authorizations are implemented at a technical level within SAP. So essentially, you have these authorizations that are combined into an authorization profile that is further combined into a role, and single or multiple roles are then assigned to a user. So let's have a quick look at some of the definitions of these concepts. So the authorization object class helps in logical grouping of authorization objects. For example, all authorization objects for object class FI begin with an F underscore and group all the finance related objects. The authorization object in turn helps in grouping together 1 to 10 authorization fields. These fields are then checked simultaneously. For example, for the vendor application authorization, there might be 20 fields involved and they are all checked at the same time in the system. An authorization field is the smallest unit against which a check runs. For example, it could be a sales organization or a purchase organization, etc. Authorization helps in combination of allowed values for each authorization field of an authorization object. Authorization profile contains authorization instances for different authorization objects. And a role is generated using a role maintenance transaction PFCG, which we will look into the system after this. And this allows the automatic generation of an authorization profile. A role describes the activities of an SAP user. And finally, you have the user itself. The user ID is used to log on to the SAP systems. On the basis of authorization profiles, it grants restricted access to functions and objects in the SAP system. So let us go into the system and take a quick look at how the user is actually set up. You can directly use transaction SU01 for user maintenance, or you can go to Tools, User Maintenance, under Administration, and SU01. So I select this user and let's take a look at what the user record consists of. So here are different tabs and here is the roles tab. So this user has been assigned different roles and these roles are all clubbed under these two profiles. So if I double click on the role ADM 940 underscore user, I go to the actual role and here I can see the menu. So when this user logs into SAP, this is the menu that he will see as part of this role. And if the user has multiple roles, then all the menus are clubbed up and you see a cumulative, a larger menu. And here are the authorizations. They're all part of the authorization profile. So if I display the authorization data, I can see all the authorizations that are part of this role. And the traffic light system essentially tells you where you need to do some work. If it's green, it's all set and good to go. But if not, then you need to populate some values. And we'll take a closer look at this as we go along. Roles are used to provide users with user-specific menus after they have logged onto the SAP system. You can define roles with the help of role maintenance using transaction PFCG. A role is a set of functions, also known as activities, that describe a specific work area. For example, the role accounts receivable accountant contains transactions, reports, and the internet or intranet links that an accountant needs for his or her daily work. In the role, you organize transactions, reports, or web addresses in a role menu. A large number of roles are pre-delivered by SAP, and before you define your own roles, it makes sense to check whether one of the SAP delivered roles can do the work that you need. One of the best practices recommended by SAP is that the automatic creation of authorization profiles should be used using transaction PFCG, and the manual generation of authorization profiles should be done only in very exceptional cases. So now we will define a new role, set it up, and then assign it to a user. And this is going to be a new user as well. And then we will log into the system with this new user and carry out a transaction. So this end-to-end process will make clear all the concepts that we've spoken about so far. So we'll now create a role to display and change a material master. So we go to Tools, Administration, User Maintenance, and Role Administration. This is where it is. And this is the PFCG transaction. You can go at it directly or by finding it in the menu and double clicking there. So we go to PSG, and this is my role maintenance screen. So let me call my role ZZ test 11. And I create a new role. So this is role to create and change material master. We then go to the menu, and here we can add the transactions that are needed to maintain the material master, which is MM01 to create, MM02 to change, and 3 to display. So if you don't know these transactions, you can just go back to the main menu, generate a session, and then here under logistics, materials management, let me expand this, material master. So here's where you find all the create transactions for various different materials, and the change transaction and the display transactions. So if you didn't know these transactions, it's very easy to find it out from the role menu. So I know the transactions and I've added them here. I then save my role. I get the message that my data is saved. I then go to authorizations, and I see that there is no profile because this is a brand new role and no authorizations or authorization profiles have yet been assigned. So I go to change data, and the system asks me for which organization unit I would like to assign the authorizations. So for now, for simplicity, I will simply give it full authorizations. So I've now given this role all the authorizations across the different org units. So org levels was saved. Now, as we saw earlier, these traffic lights need to be green, at least the ones that we need for carrying out the transactions. So the transaction we are looking at is the materials management, material data. And if we open this up, we find some greens and some non-greens. So let's quickly make them all green. So this one is amber because we need to assign the authorization group, which is empty. So we'll simply give it a full authorization for now and go to the next one. Again, the authorization group is empty. Now, if I do a drop down, I don't see any value because these values are not yet maintained in the system. However, I need to fill in some value to get a green light here. So I will simply give it full authorization for now and move on. And the next one, the same thing, full authorization. Now this activity is already set to create, change or display. But if it were not, I could select the appropriate one from here, or I could simply give it a full authorization again. So now I roll up and I see that my materials management master data settings are all set to green. So do I need to bother with any of the others, the other authorizations? Controlling, for example, is not really related to materials management, nor is production planning, classification, etc. So let's see if this suffices. We'll try to log in with this set of authorizations and see whether that works. So let me generate the profile. And the system has created the profile. I go back, my authorizations are now complete. Then I need to assign this role to a user. So let me go back to the menu and create a brand new user. So user maintenance SU01. So I'll create the user with the same name ZZTest11. So when I create a user, I need to typically fill in a few mandatory fields. And here's the logon data. I also have a user type here. This user type can be of 4 different types: dialog, system, communication, reference, or service. The reference one isn't really used, so the active types are just 4. And if you want to find out what these mean, you can just do an F1 on this field, and SAP help will tell you what each of those users mean. So for our purpose now, let me just extend this so you can see it more clearly. So it's the dialog user because we are going to use the front-end GUI to log into the system. So a new user is going to be a dialog user. We can set the initial password or have the system generate it. And typically the system generates quite a difficult to crack password. And then we go to defaults. Here's where you can set your default language, decimal notation, date format, etc. Now we won't go into parameters now, but these are essentially mechanisms to ease data entry or to quickly give you some specific system access. Then we go to roles. Now we've set up our role, which should be active. ZZ test 11. Let's see if we can assign it. Press enter. It's all green. And the profile is automatically populated as well. You can use user groups. These are typically used for mass maintenance of multiple users at the same time. Personalization functionality is still being developed by SAP and not very rich at this time. And finally, you have license data. So SAP charges based on how many users of which type and which functionality exist and are using the system. So this is what is used for that. And then you simply save your user ZZ test 11. Now we have a user, we have a role, the authorization profile assigned to this user. Let's log in with this user and see whether we are able to carry on the material change or create or display transaction. So now I log in as my new user. I will need to change my password as this is my first login. So I quickly do that. And then I get my user menu. So if you recall, we had put in 3 transactions in the user menu and they are all visible here. Let me go to the display material transaction. I double click and let's see what happens. So I am in the display material screen. I can now choose my material and I have to select the views. Let me select the basic data view here. And this is how I'm able to now display the material. I can also go back and do the other 2 transactions of create or change. So let's quickly recap at all the steps that we've done as part of this end-to-end cycle. The first thing we did was we created a role using PFCG. Now I get this message, you are not authorized to use transaction PFCG because I'm logged in with my new user and the only authorizations I have given this new user is to change, create or display the material. This user cannot do anything else. So I'll have to log out and log in with my usual user first. So I do that and then I go to transaction PFCG. And this was the user, this was the role I created. My user has the same name. Normally that is not done. The naming space and the naming standards of roles are quite different from a user. But for this test, for simplicity, I've just used the same role name as the username. So I created this role. I created the menu, which you just saw. Added the authorizations to it. So we'll have a quick look. So these were the authorizations. The ones that mattered are in green. So master data management. And then the system automatically generated an authorization profile. And then I went to SU01, created a new user with the same name, assigned the role that I had created to this user, and the system automatically added the profile and then set up the login data for this user and the other details, logged in with my new user and carried out the transactions. So all the steps in the end-to-end role user authorization profile setup were carried out successfully. Hope this gives you a good idea about SAP Security and how to set up and deal with user roles and authorizations. Thank you for watching.